Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to give you 5 of my favorite compositional techniques to help you finish your next score. Real quick before we jump into today's content, I just need to give a shout out to all my Patreon members who are supporting me and making these videos possible. So thank you guys so much. Now let's jump into my 5 tips. So just a little background before we jump in today. I am a music production student at Full Sail, and if you've been following my channel, I've been releasing a lot of short clips of my compositions. And you know, just this month alone, I've written 4 scores, and each one, you know, the length is anywhere from a couple of minutes to a minute, depending on my school assignment. Since I've been writing a lot more in the past 2 months, I wanted to sit back and, I sat back and I thought like, man, what are the tips that are really helping me accomplish this? Because I don't know if you're like me, but a couple of months ago, I found it so difficult to actually finish a composition. But, you know, recently things have really changed. So I sat back, you know, when I was thinking about what I'm going to do for this video, and I came up with a list of 5 things that I think will help you finish your scores. 1, start with your scores being melody driven from here on out. You know, this might sound like, a no crap moment, but for me, I've always been very harmony driven. So I always thought about my songs in terms of the chords that I'm using and the chord progression. On this last score I just did, which is a heroic Chinese traditional film, and it's using the 80-20 technique, which is 20% sounds regional to China, 80% is a traditional Western composition. My professor encouraged me to compose the melody first and go from there. So start off, limit yourself, only use the pentatonic scale. There's nothing wrong with the pentatonic scale. There's so much you can do with it, and it's at least a great starting point. So number 1, start off writing a melody using only the pentatonic scale. My number 2 strategy is to write everything first on the piano. So that melody that we're talking about, write it on a piano and then orchestrate. So if you're relatively new to orchestration, I am studying a book that I got from school, but this book, I was given this book probably 7 months ago, and I'm still working my way through it. It's The Study of Orchestration by Samuel Adler. It is just a great book to have. If you are a music composer or a music production guy and you just want to do a little bit of orchestration and really understand it, this is phenomenal. So some of the things that I've really taken away from it is I like to compose using the strings, and he talks about not only the anatomy of the instrument, but also a little bit of the virtuoso that goes into like being a great violinist, for example. And also uses a lot of examples of how to use it in an orchestra setting. So like, here's like the instrument strengths and weaknesses. Here's a great place to get started with it. So whenever you write your melody out on piano, depending on where you wrote it on the piano, you could say, oh, maybe this is a melody that's a little bit more suitable for a cello, or maybe a viola. Ooh, and this covers so much more than this. Like right now I'm working through the percussion section because percussion is really my weakness area. I can do really rich harmonies and melodies, but the percussion area is just an area that I'm trying to grow at, and he has stuff dedicated to this. So check out the book. But again, the technique is start on piano, then switch over to orchestration. And kind of in that same vein, my 3rd technique is to get inspiring virtual instruments, or VSTs, virtual studio technologies. If you're getting into the orchestration piece, something that I recently got that's been helping me a ton is Composer. I think it's called Composer Plus or Composer Cloud by a company called East West. As a student, it's $70 per year, and you get access to an insane amount of virtual instruments. Everything from every percussion instrument you'd ever want to, just everything that I need as a composer to write anything from a game score to a film score to a rock score. It has it in there, from vocals to choirs to weird off thing like break drums to cello, and the samples sound really, really good. And you can control it with a MIDI controller, or you can use the piano score and program it in, and you just get so much flexibility. It's kind of like a no-brainer. I don't know how I wrote anything without it, to be honest. I'm sure there may be better options, but this is like the best bang for the buck that I could find. And I have only used maybe 2 to 3% of all the stuff that's in here. So if you like all of the compositions you've heard on my channel, and if you haven't, I encourage you, at the end of this, I'm going to link to my original compositions. Check it out, and all the stuff you hear from the last, I think I got the VST about a month ago. So all the pieces I've released in the last like month and a half have all been using the East-West Composer Plus. All right, so number 4 is gonna combine 1 through 3 so far. So you already have your melody written, you wrote it on the piano first, and you're using inspiring virtual instruments to expand it in different ways and to orchestrate it. My number 4 tip, again, I am just stealing everything my professor's given me because it's really been profound in my songwriting and my composition. And that would be to harmonize 3 different ways before you settle on an overall harmony to your melody. So if you are kind of new to music composition, because I know a lot of you guys are following me from the Tonemaster Pro videos, you know, melody is the stuff that you sing. So that can be either a vocal line typically in pop music or an orchestra. If you listen to the last Chinese song that I put out, I'm using that as a reference because that's the one that's most fresh in my brain. The introductory part of that song is the melody. And then I took that melody and I just grew it upon different instruments. But the harmony, which is, you know, the stuff that's supporting it, I rewrote my harmony 3 or 4 times. So if you think about harmony, this is like the underlying chord progression, right? And for your orchestration, make your tuba section and your double bass section cover the root notes and start there. Start with like, okay, what do I, you know, how do I go about what's the root that I like driving this forward? Then you can do cool things like inversions and whatnot, but really what I did was I was like, hey, what does a major chord sound like right here? Okay, what happens if a minor chord sounds right here? Okay, so what are the notes in my harmony or in my melody? Is there anything interesting that I could do that you may not expect me to do? And, you know, I was just messing around and it felt like I was a mad scientist trying out all these different harmonies. And at the end of the day, the one that I kind of went with was something that I traditionally probably wouldn't have went with. Because, you know, in the past, the way I would write songs is I'd write my harmony on guitar and then orchestrate it with all these instruments. Now I'm building up my piano chops. I start on piano, then I orchestrate it across like a full orchestra. But really learning how to take that harmony and shift it 2 or 3 different ways really took my piece from sounding kind of generic and boring to like, oh snap, I'm kind of starting to sound like I know what I'm doing. And again, this is all thanks to my professor, Professor Woodrig. I don't know if he watches these, but I subscribe to him on YouTube. Maybe he'll see this. Shout out to him, man. He's really like pushed me this last semester, and I'm grateful because I'm really starting to get my stride as a composer. All right, so the 5th thing I want to encourage you to do is write a song a week. It sounds like, if you're like me, it was so difficult to finish a song for the longest time. But my professor said, you know, you can either, there's nothing wrong with not finishing a song. The issue comes when we make it a habit of not finishing our songs. So what I want to encourage you to do is, you know, once you create your melody line and you're going in whatever direction your inspiration takes you, give yourself like, hey, by Sunday at midnight, I have to be done with this track. And at first, if you've never done an exercise like this is College 101, basically. And at Full Sail University, we have stuff that's due every week. So I'm getting used to this rhythm, and I'm grateful we're like this, because at Clemson, it's like if I had a computer science project, oh, it's not due until 2 months. So I'll wait a month and 3 weeks to get started. You know what I mean? So, you know, putting yourself these artificial deadlines of like, I got to have this song done by Sunday at midnight, so that way the client can hear it Monday morning. Even if you don't have a client, fake it until you make it, right? Fake it until you do have a client, because if you get used to putting these artificial timelines, it forces you to get into this concept of good enough, right? Like perfection just doesn't exist, and thank God, because the world would be boring if it did. So if you put this artificial timeline on it, then you can say like, hey, once I get to this part, it is good enough. And also it forces you, like, one thing that's so weird about creativity, and maybe I'll make a whole video on this, is I find that the more constraints that I can put on myself, the better I can create, right? So again, the more constraints I put on myself, the easier it is to create. So, you know, all things from like, hey, I'm only going to use 2 different keys, maybe a relative minor and the relative major, or only 2 modes. Like I'm going to go from a minor Aeolian to focusing on like the Lydian side of the scale. And that's really for melodic development. If I keep myself in this parameter, if I'm only going to use these 2 things, I feel like that helps so much. And also temporally, or timeline, you know, like I'm going to use these 2 scales or these 2 spices of a scale, and I'm only going to have a week to really flush this out. that right there kind of like puts on, it gives you, you know, in the military as a machine gunner, like you've got these left and right lateral limits of like your sector of fire. You know, anything that's way out here I can't hit, that's for my other machine gunner, and anything way over here I can't hit. But if it's in this vector of fire, game on, right? So I feel like the same thing kind of like helps out with creativity. If you give your left and your right lateral limits of creativity, like I have a week to do it, I can only use these two things. Now I find that like at first you might feel like I can't do anything, and all of a sudden you're like, I just get into this tempo and I can just create. So give yourself limitations. If you're uncomfortable doing, you know, 2 scales or whatever, start with just a timeline. Say, I'm only going to give this a week. At a week, wherever it is at Sunday at midnight, that's just where it is. Time to move on to the next thing. Well, hey, if you've watched this far, 1, I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you so much. 2, what I would really enjoy is in the comment section, give me like a synopsis of what I talked about. So that way I know that, you know, this is basically reinforcing the learning from this video, but also you can help someone else with your synthesis of the content in here. Lastly, what do you use? You know, these are my 5 tips. What are your 5 tips? I'll end on the train of thought that if you enjoy this type of content, and if you enjoy studying, you know, obviously you're here, so you're studying how to become a better composer and songwriter, consider checking out my Patreon. I put a little bit more stuff that I can get into, like the weeds, that's kind of hard to do on a YouTube video. So if you're interested in this and you want more content like this, consider checking out the Patreon. You can get access to it for just $5 a month. And with that, I appreciate all of you guys. Thank you so much for supporting me in this journey, and I'll see you in the next video.